Welcome to the Conscious Investor. Let's get started. I have been waiting for this episode that was supposed to be recorded on Dennis's birthday initially and rescheduled. So happy birthday. But I am joined by an extraordinary man who is behind the Building Men podcast and just entire platform that is absolutely amazing. I am so stoked to have you here. So welcome to the Conscious Investor.
Oh, this is awesome. Thank you so much for having me. Truly appreciate it. Appreciate the birthday wishes. I went on two different podcasts on my birthday. And that would have been the third. It's actually good spacing it out a little bit right now. I would have been tired of hearing myself talk by that time.
Yeah, exactly. This is the stories and everything. But, okay, so I want to just give the audience a clue as to how I found you. And I jumped into Instagram and I had sworn off Instagram for forever. And I finally got onto Instagram and I'm looking around for great content and what's going on. And somehow this is one of those crazy things. Somehow I find Building Men and I'm like, whoa, this is really powerful content. And this is stuff that my husband is talking about. And I started just finding all of these alignments in the conversations that my husband and I are having. And, just some of the things that he speaks about within, what is it to be a man? And we have a son and these concepts. And I was just blown away because I love the message that you guys are perpetuating. So can you tell us about, you'll do a better job talking about Building Men. I told you off air that I think it's kind of funny that I'm a woman and I'm like, nope, we got to support this. I love this because I feel like there's this deficit right now. And I feel like men need to be built up. I feel like there's this attack against masculinity. And here I am, I'm a woman and I'm like, no, team man, I want to protect, masculinity. So tell us a little bit about, and I won't interrupt, Building Men and the vision behind it.
Sure. And then I could get the origin story is really interesting as well with Building Men. So it's really a movement trying to understand what authentic masculinity actually means. And through the course of me and my younger brother, Anthony, Anthony's 14 years younger than me. So I just turned 45 on December 2nd. And it was a true journey that I went on during the course of the last year and a half since I started the Building Men podcast. But before that, a long journey through bumps and bruises, trials and tribulations. Part of it was, I'm sure your audience knows about the idea of the second mountain where you climb one mountain in your life and you think you're going in the right direction. You get to the peak of it and you say, what the hell am I doing here? This isn't where I'm meant to be. So I've gone through that journey as well. And basically we talk a lot about the pendulum has swung from, say, my father's generation or our parents' generation. My father was a blue collar worker and he was, he worked his ass off, a very stoic man, didn't show any emotion whatsoever. I did not see my father cry until he was in his late 60s. It wasn't until then he told me he loved me. It was that kind of a generation where everything was very strong and you needed to look a certain way, but the emotions were so bottled up and pushed down that you can get to a point where you can explode in an emotional outburst. And it's come so far in the other direction, the pendulum, to now we have this gushy, gooey, weak, crop of men who all they want to do is people please. And it's, you hear happy wife, happy life, which is one of the worst sayings I think I've ever heard before, because what happens is, you're not showing up as an authentic version of yourself. So we've gone on this journey really trying to understand what masculinity means by talking to, several men and actually women from all over the world. And we talk to them about their experience, where they how they define masculinity from their own journeys. We talk a lot about how traumatic events in our own experience helps to shape that definition. And then we talk about what they can do or what we can do as a community to help support each other and perpetuate this message moving forward.
Okay. Again, I'm just so in love with everything behind this. And I think that it's incredibly fascinating that there is this growing number of men that are rising up. And so really, what was the impetus for you to like step out? I will tell you, I've been pushing my husband to step out for, I don't know, a couple of years, but you can't push anybody into anything. It
Yeah.
needs to come from their heart. It's a big deal and everything. But what was that for you?
So I'll use the opportunity to bring it back to where it started with the mission
Yeah.
for building men, and then my courage to step out. It was basically circumstantial in nature. The building men started. I was a 28-year-old, first year as an assistant principal. I was a quick journey as a teacher, less than 5 years as a teacher. Taught sixth grade in a middle school setting. I was a varsity baseball coach after playing college baseball. Always wanted to coach. That's what I really, really loved. But then there was an opportunity right in the town where I lived, and I got a job as an assistant principal. And as soon as I started, it was with junior. It was a junior high school, seventh and eighth grade kids. Day one, I recognized the challenges that the young men in the school were facing. And
Mm-hmm.
so basically, what was happening is the kids were coming to school later, not coming at all. They were getting in trouble a ton. I mean, there were so many disciplinary incidents with the kids, with the lack of respect for adults in the building. They were getting into fights. They were bullying situations. Their grades were terrible. They were getting classified into special education at an alarming rate when compared to the female counterparts in the school. And I said, I need to do something about this. I can't just watch this happen and me just come in and be the disciplinarian in the school. So I decided to start a boys group. And as soon as I started this group, almost every seventh and eighth grade boy in the school joined the group. And I was amazed by it. I'm not that cool. I don't know how
You're cool. Come
there
on.
was, there was a girls group that was happening in the school. We had a guidance counselor, and she was running a girls group called Girls Speak Out, and it was around equality and body image and social justice. So there was already this established female entity in the school for the girls to go and speak their mind. There wasn't a synonymous boys program. So as soon as I started
Mm-hmm.
this group, all the boys joined up, and they thought it was going to be their opportunity to bitch about the girls. And they thought they were talk about boobs and butts, and that was what was going to happen. And basically, I said,
Right.
all right,
Middle school
yeah,
boys.
right, exactly. I was like, and it's still stuff that we talk about today, right? So we
There's a 13-year-old in every man. My husband tells me this all the time.
Absolutely, 100% agree with that. And that's the cool thing when I get to the podcast. What I've recognized is just the opportunity to let your guard down and just be big kids again a little bit. That's part of what we need, is to be able to do that. So I recognize the power in bringing this group together as a community. I was running almost every day a week. The kids were coming to school an hour early to be a part of this. Set it up in a circle. Every young man had to shake hands with every other young man in the group. And I was running like 6 or 7 groups every day before school. Like it was like every single weekday I was doing these groups. And what I started to recognize was, one, their ideas about masculinity. It was based on, and I was growing up with the same idea. It was based
Mm-hmm.
on, first, it was who was bigger, faster, stronger. The better athlete
Yeah.
was the better man. Then it was, how many girls can you bang? It was this
Mm-hmm.
notch on the belt thing. So the boys that had more of this sexual prowess and in upper middle school into high school and beyond, they were better men in the eyes of their peers. And then it
Mm-hmm.
was how much money they were making. So it was the number of zeros in the bank account, the house on the hill, the car that they drove. They would look at these guys and say, that's what a man should be like. And we basically broke down this idea saying every single one of those things could potentially be taken away from you. Every one of those things. So if
Mm-hmm.
you're basing your idea of masculinity on something that's extrinsic in nature, something that could be taken away from you, then where are you?
Mm-hmm.
And I go back to my father's generation, to where it was about, he was a great athlete, he was a good-looking guy, and he made a good living. And now, he's going to be 70 years old this year. He's not in the same health that he was. If the whole sexual prowess thing, when you're 70 years old, if that's how you're basing your masculinity around, and then he still works. He spent money as he got it, but now, like, his idea of masculinity, it's not the same because he was basing it on these other things. So we started to talk about, well, let's base masculinity on something that is intrinsic in nature, that cannot be taken away, but also provides value to the world.
Mm-hmm.
We started to base masculinity on things like integrity, things like being accountable, showing up, relationships. We talk about, and we've all heard,
Mm.
when you're on the waning moments of your life, you're not going to look back and say, I wish I, had sex with more girls. I wish I spent more time in the gym, or I wish I went to work a couple extra days to make some more money. You would say, I wish I spent more time with my family. I wish I was around loved ones more. I wish I would. So we would talk about that. So we're basing our idea of masculinity around our relationships, and then what we can do to leave a legacy, to do something for the greater good, to do something that could make someone's life a little bit easier because of our existence on the planet. So we started to really dive deep into those ideas. And what I started to recognize, Julie, was that the kids were coming to school on time. Their grades were getting better. Our suspension rate dropped 400% in 1 year. It was
Shut up.
remarkable the things that were happening. So I was like, I need to do something with this. I'm onto something here.
Whoa.
This is exactly like, there needs to be something more like this in schools. So I decided I'm going to write a book about this. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to write a book. This is going back to 2005. And so I decided that's what I'm going to do. Put the idea down on paper and then put it up on a shelf and left it there for another 15 years. And it just, as life was going on, I wound up having 3 kids. I was climbing the educational ladder. I became a principal, and then I became a principal of a bigger school district, And I was thinking, I'm going to get my doctorate, become a superintendent. This first mountain idea, climbing to this top and this pinnacle of this first mountain. Slowly but surely, my marriage was deteriorating. So now fast forward, I'm working in a school district where the superintendent and the board of education said, you need to spend less time doing these types of things, these touchy-feely things, less time around the community part of it, and you need to be spending more time looking at lesson plans, making sure that the teachers are teaching to what's going to be assessed, so our test scores look better when the kids take the standardized test. And I couldn't do it anymore. I could not do it anymore. So at that point, I left public education. I took a risk. I gambled, started betting on myself a little bit, started working with school districts as an independent consultant and a coach. So I was subcontracted out, and I started traveling and working with school districts, and it was going great from the spring of 2019 to the spring of 2020. So now fast forward to March of 2020, I'm going through a separation, which led ultimately to a divorce. School shut down, so now my work as a consultant and a coach was gone. It went from where I was making a cushy 6-figure salary as a principal with a pension right around the corner to making almost nothing, almost overnight. So now I had this moment where what can I do now? I had standing at the edge of the cliff saying, what's next for me? What am I going to do to make money? How am I going to handle this? I couldn't get back into schools. It's during COVID, so no one's hiring anyone at this point.
Right.
So I kind of, had a moment where I was sulking around and depressed a little bit, and then I shook myself off and I said, "Let's go. What's it about for you? If you're gonna bet on something in your life, let's do it where you're gonna help other people, and it's gonna be back to your roots of why you started in this direction in the first place as a coach and helping people." So I said, I'm gonna do something with Building Men. So I decided to start a podcast, and that was on July 1st of 2020. And the beginning podcast, the episode 1 was called The Decision. And the first, 30 episodes it was like me sitting in front of a computer with a microphone reading a script. It sounded so awkward. I
cannot even imagine this.
And I was nervous. It was just me pretty much with a microphone. And it sounded like I was giving a speech right before an assembly program in front of 300 middle school kids. It sounded very robotic. I go back and I listen now, Julie, and I'm like, ugh.
Oh no, first podcast episodes, I'm always like, yeah, so just skip to, episode 175. I don't know. No.
Exactly. And so, but it's cool because I was able to timestamp and document the way, like the transformation of Building Men. Even I go back and look on Instagram, and I was never on social media until I was separated. I just was like, social media, I don't need that in my life. So even the first couple posts with Building Men, you could see this journey that the social media has gone on.
The journey is obvious on the Instagram account. Like, it's totally obvious.
Pretty cool. Yep.
Yes.
And then what happened? So in the beginning episodes, I would call an episode Resiliency, and that was it. I would talk for 12 minutes. It would be 3 points about how do you become more of a resilient person. There was a poem, and then sign, seal, deliver, we'll move on to the next one. And I did that for a long time.
Mhm.
It was actually during a time where I was, personally, as we decided, my ex and I decided we were getting a divorce. Where we were living, we had the house up on the market, and we didn't want the kids to have any transition. So the kids stayed in the house as that we were selling the house. I would go and live with my brother for 3 days, and my ex would be at the house, and then she would go with her parents, and I would come back to the house with the kids. So the kids stayed in the same spot. There was no
Mhm.
transition for them. So at the time that I'm living with my brother in the days off when I wasn't at the house as it was selling, um, and he's like, dude, I love what you're doing with this podcast. He said, but it sounds like someone jabbed a stick up your ass. He's like, you got to settle down. Like, he's like, you're really engaging, but you're talking and you sound so like robotic and tight. And so I took his advice and I started to loosen up a little bit. I started to tell my story, the true story of everything that was going on in my life and some childhood trauma. And I started to
Mhm.
loosen up a little bit, and then it became more authentic, and it sounded more like, okay, maybe this guy has something that can help me out, or there's something here that I resonate with on his journey. And then fast forward, I learned how to. Everything was self-taught. I had no idea how to do anything. So everything that we've done has been us learning. Yeah, it's pretty cool going through that process, and then you're really proud of yourself afterwards. Like how we've come a long way during this journey. I brought my brother in. So Anthony was 14 or 15 years old when I first started building men in 2005. So part of me being his older brother, I was his older brother. I was a coach and a mentor. I was a father figure for him, and I'm now his best friend. So we have a really really close connection. So once we were able to start bringing in guests, I had him on the show as a guest a couple times, and now we are in studio together and we co-host the show. And it's kind of turned into this something totally different now. Where I mean, it's definitely there's comic relief every episode. We're brothers. We bust balls. There's a ton of jokes that happen. Very off-color jokes that are happening, as men will do when they get together. But we're always trying to hit a topic that really brings in stories of resiliency, stories of overcoming an obstacle, stories of rewriting the script on what masculinity means. And I'll tell you what, sometimes we're in studio and depending on when this comes out, there's a holiday treat that we're gonna put out that we're redoing a classic like quote unquote holiday scene. So
Okay.
it's really funny. So, but what happens is when we get together, there are times that when you're laughing so hard that you can't catch your breath. That will happen when we're in
Yeah.
the studio together and we're looking at each
Right.
other like, I can't believe that this is our reality right now. 2 years ago, I was miserable. I was depressed. I was 40 pounds overweight, and all of a sudden, now I'm sitting here thinking, I'm so grateful that the world brought me into this spot where I'm with my best friend. We're doing this podcast. We're meeting amazing people, and I really believe we're doing some good in the world and we're helping people.
You're not just doing some good in the world, you're doing profound good in the world. Like it's such important necessary work. And if you are a lady listening to this right now, you know a ton of men and you need to turn them on to the Building Men, and you yourself need to join and follow and subscribe and all of that, because it's freaking awesome and it's hilarious, but it's also like so substantial, and that's what's exciting about it. But I love what you were just saying, Dennis. You're like, hey, went through, I mean, trial by fire. You're like
Oh, yeah.
getting kicked around, but that's when like out of the ashes rise the phoenix. Like that is what happens. So, okay, somebody's listening right now and their life is falling apart and everything. Like, what was it within you that allowed you to rise up, to rise beyond, and to get going? 40 pounds overweight. Come on. I know that all of that resonates. And by the way, you look fantastic. So I'm like, people are listening and they're like, that's my life right now.
Yeah, it was what I think it was. So when I go back, it was around March, April of 2020 when I had this moment, and ultimately what it came down to for me was my children. I I thought about all the things that I would say as an administrator, trying to motivate kids, or even the teachers that were working for me at the time. And a lot of the things that I was saying, I wasn't living them myself. So there was that man in the glass moment, where
Mm-hmm.
you're looking at yourself in the mirror and didn't recognize the person you saw. So I took a couple pictures like So I posted before and after pictures where I'm looking at the man in the mirror and he was just this sad person. I mean, just like physically, you could just see how sad just the way I looked, but then you could just feel the emotional weight that I was carrying. So for me, it came down to, listen, I'm going through a separation and divorce right now. I could go into a shell. I could overdrink. I could keep, drinking, to oblivion. I could overeat. I could watch porn. I could do all these things to buffer the true emotion. Or I could basically say, all right, there's this difficult thing in front of me. I need to go through it. That's what I've recognized is as things come up, I was trying to sidestep so many things in my life, in my marriage, trying to avoid conflict and, confrontation, trying to do a people-pleasing nice guy situation. And I could go down a road and tell you a story that'll blow your doors off with that as well. But what it ultimately came down to was I wasn't showing up like the father my kids needed me to be and the man that I needed to see in the mirror. And so I just made a decision one day, and it's actually, I joined this online boot camp. I could pick out the day. It was the end of April of 2020. Now, after quarantine, I packed on the pounds, I packed on the LBs over the course of a month during quarantine, not doing anything. And I pulled the car over. I'm listening to a podcast. I pulled the car over, and the guy who was doing the podcast offered a free boot camp. He offered a boot camp, and he said, 30 days, there's going to be daily challenges. Pay whatever you want to pay. Pay whatever you can afford.
Was this Angelo, by the way?
It wasn't Angelo. It's so funny. Now that I know Angelo,
all right, I'm like,
his name was Stephen Mathis, and he does a podcast called The Holistic Alpha. I had him on as a guest. Angelo Cisco is a total badass, by the way. I love that guy.
I love him.
We talk all the time, he and I now. But so
yeah, you guys are part of that tribe that is like completely strengthening the masculine fabric of America and around the world.
And these are all guys that I've met over the past even 6 months or so that I never knew they existed. And now, and I'll talk to you a little bit about 2 events that we have coming up that are really exciting as well.
Definitely.
But this moment, so now I'm like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to make the decision. And as I go back and I relive that, it's so funny. There was a song that came on the radio. It was a song by the Eagles called Already Gone. And there was a line in the song, and basically says, too often times it happens that we live our lives in chains and we never even know we have the key. And I heard that song. I've heard that song 1,000 times. My old man listened to classic rock as I was growing up, Led Zeppelin, the Beatles, the Stones, you name it. I heard that song by the Eagles 1,000 times, and I never heard those words. At that moment, those words rang so true to me, and I'm recognizing that I am living this life in chains, and I'm feeling like I'm locked in, but I'm the one that can change that myself. So for me, it started with my first steps needed to be the physical fitness portion of it. So I needed to do something to get back in shape and start moving. And then that turned into, I did this boot camp for 30 days and I killed it. And by the end of it, the guy's like, listen, do another 30 days for free. Come join again. Give me a testimonial. At the end of that, he said, you have been such a badass in this. I'll give you a free month of coaching. What do you want to work on? I'm like, I want to start a podcast. He's like, all right, I'll help you start a podcast. So this all started to happen for me. And then all of a sudden now I was able to, once the physical stuff happened and, got some of the physical stuff. And I'm like, all right, I need to do some mental work and some emotional work and some spiritual work. And it all started to the momentum started to carry me. But what I recognize is coming up with a blueprint to help men that are going through the same situation. Now it's,
yes.
I recognize that it's sustainable, and some people that I'm helping that are going through this stuck spot in their life, been there, brother. I've done it. I've seen it. Here's a couple things that might be able to help you on your journey.
It's such a gift, such a gift. Are you enjoying this episode? Do the world a favor and help trip the algorithm by leaving a review so that this content reaches many others. And now back to the show. So what's the deal with our generation? Because the guys outside, I could throw some people in that might be on the outskirts, but there is this uprising in our generation, I told you, I'm going to be 45 in a a few months. I'm so stoked. I just think getting older is the best thing ever. And I love.
Been great so far. Yeah. 45's been great.
Yeah. You're 8 days in. No, but I'm wondering it's not, I'm not hearing these voices come from the men in their 20s, not that they're not there. And it could just be that, I get profiled because I'm, in my age bracket, but and I'm getting marketed to. You and I know how that works. But do you see that as like this group of men that are kind of rising up, somewhere in their 40s, late 30s, 40s? Tell me what you see with that. If that's just in my mind, or if you guys are like, nope, we're changing this and we're going to help you guys below us.
So I think there's a little bit of that. There's a couple things. Great question, by the way. So the first thing I think about is as we go through developing our identity. So I think about theorists that I've learned about as an educator, and basically you go through these different stages of development as you're growing and maturing. And when your adolescence is during your adolescent time is when you're starting to figure out where you fit in the world. So first, how do I see myself? How do others see me? And then how do I see myself fitting into society? And as we're going through our adolescence, when there's something that happens to us that kind of stifles us during that time, there are some of us that get stuck in this identity creation portion of our lives, and we never fully work through it. So what do I believe in? Where am I supposed to go? What is my mission? What is my message? Where our forefathers were like, I'm picking up a gun, I'm going to war, I'm going to work, I'm providing for my family. But now what happens is people are going through this spot, and it's like, I heard something on Instagram or on a reel recently where they were asking kids that are in their teens into early 20s, at what point do we consider someone an adult? And an adult means that you're living on your own, you're paying your own bills, and you have a full-time job. At what point do we consider a person an adult? And the average age that they were talking about was late 20s into 30 years old that we consider someone an adult. And I'm thinking about that, and it scared me. It scared me that that generation is considering an adult all the way into their 30s. But back to your idea about why it's happening with this group, I think some of us were going through never fully went through that identity creation portion of it. So it was like this group of lost boys that we were really unsure what we wanted to do. We knew we needed to go to work. We knew we needed to be successful, have our family, have the house in the hill with the white picket fence. And coincidentally, I had an episode on the podcast called Fuck the White Picket Fence. That was one of the names of the podcast episode, because we get so enamored with the stuff, with the granite countertops, with the 2.5 kids and the dog, named Butch or Skippy or something. And what we needed to recognize, it needs to be about something more than that. So there are men that get to that point and they grow the ponytail, they get the red car, and then they date a 22-year-old with big boobs. That becomes something that, all right, that's what I'm going to do. Or you can get to that point and recognize my life needs to be about something more. It needs to be about significance, going all the way back to the idea with the initial thing with building men. What do we need to do? We need to, as men, it's about relationships. It's about integrity. It's about, accountability. But it's about leaving a mark and doing something as far as a legacy is concerned. We're at that spot now. When you mention our age group, it's either now or never. We're going to do something to leave a legacy. Roll up your sleeves and let's get going on doing that right now.
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh. Just not mic drops. It's like a pile of mics right over there. Okay. So I have to go back to like just the degeneration of masculinity and stuff, and the idea of adulthood, and just say, I mean, we read Little House on the Prairie as a family. We read through the series, and our kids are pretty young, but if you read through those books, you're like, dang, like these are tough people. And you look at, Laura Ingalls Wilder's, her husband, like he lied about being 18 or something like that, just so he could get a homestead. Because he's like, well, he could do it all.
Yeah.
So you think about why would like the idea of, oh, we're not a man until we're, in our late 20s, early 30s, like that's not an adult, when it's like way back when in the 1800s, it's like, man, you're an adult, at 17, 18, you're running your own show and like freaking building your whole homestead.
Absolutely. And here's what happened was back then there were these significant rites of passage for young men. And like if you think about back in the day, like way back in the day, young men were 13, 14 years old in a tribal sense, and they were pulled away from the men of the tribe, and they were taken into the woods, and they had to kill an animal, start a fire. There was like this whole thing that they had to do, be out on their own for a period of time to prove to themselves that they were now a man in their tribe's eyes, and then come back as a man from the ceremonial thing in society. And then men would go to war, and there were all these things, and they were moving out of the house when they were 18 and starting families and working, and now we've come to a point where for women in society there is a ceremonial day, there's a timestamp day where they can say, I was a girl and now I'm a woman. Like there's a specific in relation to how the females in the tribe treat her, right? So your daughter's 13 years old and she gets her period, and now that she's seen as a woman, right? For young men, there's not this thing.
Right.
There's not that thing where we can say that they are a boy and now they're a man. So what's happened is, and I think about my younger brother's generation, right? So he's gonna be 31 years old. There's a group of like lost boys. They're 30 years old, but they're living in this extended state of adolescence because they've never gone through that rite of passage. So they're out, they're making money, but they're still spending that money on going out to the bars every single weekend. They're watching porn nonstop. They're playing video games until 2 o'clock in the morning. They're not doing anything of significance or substance because they've never had that rite of passage or see themselves as true men in society. I wonder how many kids at that age, that 27-year-old to 30-year-old age, it's like, I am a man and I could absolutely fucking do this. I don't know how much that's happening right now, and it's sad and it scares me. And I have a son who's 16 years old. He's going to be 17. So every opportunity, I'm like, you need to do this. You need to, and for my daughters as well. But I don't step in and solve problems for them. And here's a quick aside as a parent. The worst thing you could do for your parent is solve your problems for their kids. We're robbing kids of the opportunity to fail, to learn, to grow, to pick themselves up, to understand what resiliency is. We're robbing kids of that. As a principal, I would tell parents all the time, don't come and talk to me. Not because I don't want to talk to you, because if you're solving your kids' problems, if you're doing that, they're not learning the value in the lesson. It's doing them such a disservice. So for my kids, I tell them, they come home, oh, Mrs. Crabapple was so mean to me, blah, blah, blah. All right, well, what did Mrs. Crabapple say when you talked to her? I didn't talk to her. Start there. And if that doesn't work out, then schedule a meeting with the principal. My daughter, who's in 8th grade, has scheduled 2 meetings with the principal already, just to go talk about something that was bothering her, because she went through the channels. And I'm like, I'm not, and I know the guy too. And he'll every once in a while, I was like, Jules scheduled a meeting with me. I'm like, good luck, You'll bring your A game, because she'll bring it too.
Oh, I love it. To speak to that. So you don't know this, but I was a public school educator for many, many, many years. And so I can speak to, I'm like, yes, all of this resonates, but now I'm not. I'm a full-time investor and coach. And I have my son who is, he's a natural born leader, and he is learning to use that skill, and that's raw material. And so here he is, he's like failing a couple of classes. I'm like, I told him, like, I'm not logging in. I'm not going to hone after. I'm not going to be on you and about your grades. Like, hey, buddy, if I get a call from school and your grades are bad, you're not having Xbox and all that fun stuff. So I don't know. He comes home to me with a note like, mom, here, so-and-so wrote, like, this teacher wrote a note, like, see what she has to say. Like, great, you figure it out. These are your grades. Cause I don't remember my parents ever riding my butt about my grades. It's like, sink or swim on your own.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not that I don't care, but I'm like, if you can't solve these problems, if you can't find it within yourself to rise up over this, then when are you going to figure that out? Like, these are the years to figure it out in the safety of your home with your tribe.
And I have so much to say in education. And a quick aside, I was a majority of my income was coming from still working with schools in a subcontracting way. I was working with an organization, which I shall keep nameless right now, that I would go and work with school districts to teach teachers about trauma responsive teaching, about building community, about proactive behavior management, about the language we're using when we're speaking to kids. And what happened was they reached out and they said, listen, we found your podcast. And for you to continue working with us, one, you need to stop talking about schools, the education system in the way that you're talking about it, because I have a lot to say about what we're not doing right in schools based on my experience.
Preach it. Yeah. No.
And they said, you need to stop cursing on your podcast. And I said, all right, no, I am not. I'm not going to be censored. I'm going to keep talking about it. To me, that meant that I was going in the right direction. That somebody in the big machine wants me to stop talking about it. I'll say all the time, I'll say, when we're thinking about schools, the way that schools are set up, we're creating factory workers. We're creating
That's right.
employees in school. And I had a guy on the podcast. His name was Matt Beaudreau, and he's partners with Tim Kennedy, the MMA guy, the badass dude Tim Kennedy, and they do these acting academies all over the country. And I had him on, and he's a fascinating guy. And he talks about the way that schools are set up is, you know, if I wanted the way that schools are, if I want the kids to learn about jujitsu, I would tell them, okay, here's what you need to do. You need to read a book about all the famous jujitsu fighters. And what you need to do from that point on is you're going to learn all the stats about everything that they've done, learn their heights and weights, and you're going to read books about them. Then you're going to go home and you're going to do a report about jujitsu fighters. Then what you're going to do is you're going to come into school, do a presentation about it. Then we're going to give you a standardized assessment about these jujitsu fighters, and we're going to compare you against other kids and what they know about it. That's school. Education is get on the mat and do jujitsu. Learn by doing. Learn from a master who's doing it and try it. And that's what we're missing in schools is we're creating these cookie cutter molds of kids. We're not giving them an experience. To your point before, we need to push back when we start letting kids, or push up when we start letting kids really experience things. Kids at 10 years old can start businesses. You know, why not do something that's really experiential? That's when learning happens. Learning happens when you can take an emotion and attach it to a learning experience. When those things are combined together, that's the shit that really sinks in. I just did a post about this, or I commented on someone's post about this. Think about how when we're saving money for colleges, right? You know, for my kids to go to college, it's going to be $200,000 for my kids if they go to four-year schools. $200,000 for them to go. How many parents will readily take out loans or pay for our kids' college tuition for them to go for 4 years, maybe learn some stuff, drink their faces off, party their asses off, and that's no problem. But how many of us would say to our kids, what are you really interested in doing? You show a passion about this. How about I take out a small business loan and we'll start you up a business when you're 18 years old. Learn how to do it. Go and be mentored by someone and learn how to do it by being an apprentice and then do it. I was so fascinated by this post. I was like, I need to say something, or we absolutely need to start rethinking college. College is a game, right? You know, how many of us right now what I'm doing has nothing to do with the education? So I went for my bachelor's and then my master's degree to get an educational leadership degree. None of that matters to what I'm doing. There wasn't anything that I learned during that experience that's helping me right now. Really, I mean, maybe how to shotgun a beer or something like that, but that's
yeah, we have that conversation with our kids all the time. We've had it since they were very young. I have a 13 and 10, and the conversation goes like this: college is college is available, but really, do you need it? I mean, we're in a very, very different point in the world in the information age to where all of that is going to be shifting around in our generation and in theirs. Since you don't need a college. I mean, I think you can attest to this. The people that are the most successful people that I know are the people, who are entrepreneurial and they are running their own show.
Kids, right? Let's teach kids that. Let's teach them how to start a business. Let's teach them financial literacy. Let's teach them how to communicate in a deep way. Talk to them about nonverbal communication. Let's talk to them about paraverbal communication. Talk to them about being resilient, being able to communicate, like a million different things like that, lessons that we should be teaching them, not, what are every single state capital? And they learn that 7 different times in different grades. How many times, my kids are always like, oh, we're learning about dinosaurs. Wait, you learned about dinosaurs 2 years ago. They're not going anywhere.
2nd grade, we already got that covered.
Right, exactly. Right. Exactly.
It's so interesting. You and I could really have a fierce conversation on education. I can already tell that. And that's why I'm like, it's really good that I left. I loved what I did. But when you have, when you get called into the administrator's office and they're like, so teachers are complaining that you're making them look bad. I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm ambitious and I'm not sorry. I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing because I believe in this is how I teach. Absolutely. So that was my last year. That's when I was done. Okay, well, I know that I value myself and I have a lot I can educate investors and I can coach adults and do a top down. And that's what you're doing. So let's talk about that for a second, because this is interesting that we're both like have a background in ed, but now a lot of people in my world, we always hear like it's for the children, like help the children, and I love children and I want to serve the children, but I have now flipped it around and said, wait a second, we're trying to pour into this generation that isn't going to rise up for a long time. When what if we go from the top down leadership model, and what if we, like you're doing with men, and I do this through my high performance coaching with adults of all kinds, it's like, what if we help adults who need the support and help that they need so that they can heal and they can be whole and complete and they can, connect with like and activate their deeper purpose in the world? What if we could do that? We get instant different in the world now, and they're going to affect the people below them.
Absolutely.
What do you think? Am I crazy?
100% agree. And here's what I think too. I think there's a multi-layered approach. I think we need to start with this generation that is impacting the younger generation. I mean, one, being able to impact the people that have the ability to sign up for coaching and have the resource to be able to do that, that can then take their voice and then further, reach behind and help the next group out. So I think that that's definitely there. And I also think there is a need for doing this in schools at a younger generation as well. I want to take a bulldozer and, figuratively plow down the schools and then rebuild them again in a different way, with this idea of mentoring being a big part of it as well. But there's absolutely, that's a huge part of it, is working with a group that can make, the top down model, like they can make the difference on the younger generation as well.
That's crazy. Okay. I don't even want this conversation to end, but we are going to have to wrap up, and it's driving me insane that we have to wrap up because I'm so excited and I've been excited about this conversation, and I'm just going to let you know, best conversation ever. So, and I've been recording podcasts all day. So here's my question is, how have you seen, since we're talking about leadership top down and how we influence the next generation, how has your influence, what's the influence of you on your children?
So
with building men, context.
I'm gonna take a couple deep breaths so I don't get emotional during this.
You can get emotional. This is safe.
It was, I know for me, if I get a guest to cry, I'm like, I got him. It's like
I'm not trying to get anybody.
It's like Barbara Walters' SNL skit where Sherry O'Terry looks over I got him again. But no, what ultimately happened was, I think my kids saw me, and we didn't even get into, we could have a whole nother episode just about trauma, because I could really talk deeply about how that impacted me growing up. I was a victim of bullying, and then there was a whole situation with my parents it's a crazy story. But what happened was, I started to show up in a very passive way as this seeker of approval, people pleaser man for a long period of time that I didn't like, and I was not aligned to what I truly believed, and it took this shaking up of myself, having the courage to say, you know what, this marriage needs to end. I can't do this anymore. I can't live this way anymore. So for my kids to see me going from a victim mindset and a victim mentality to becoming the hero of my story and the architect of what's happening in my future, they've made certain comments that will substantiate that idea. And they've all said, they've watched me. They basically said it seemed like I went, and I'm a big dude, I'm 6'4", 225. My son said it seemed like you went from 5'8" to 7 foot. He's used to kind of walk around in this slumped over way.
Wow.
He said now you walk around, he's you have this presence and confidence about you because you did it yourself. I had help along the way, as we all do, having someone that can mentor you, that can coach you along the way. Right. But ultimately the work has to be done by looking in the mirror and doing it. So for me, this journey, it was, and what my kids would say, they're proud that I didn't just stick it out for, I needed to stay in as in education for another 12 years, where I could have taken an earlier retirement. My retirement would have been 6 figures for doing nothing.
12 years.
12 more years. And so for me, so many people, Julie, told me I was crazy when I said, that I was leaving education. You're nuts. I can't believe you're doing this. I cannot believe. And then when I'm telling people that now I'm, my salary or my income because of this, I'm finding my podcast, there's a big gap in there right now. And when I told them, no, I'm not changing, people are like, are you crazy? Like, I'm like, no, 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 no. I totally believe in this because I believe so wholeheartedly in what I'm doing that this message is way bigger than whatever that financial loss might be. I'll gain that back tenfold by being
That's
able
right.
to truly speak my message in front of people.
Oh my gosh. I love it. I love it so much. If you haven't read Michael Neal's book, Super Coach, have you read this?
I haven't read it yet.
It's really
It'll
great.
be next on the list. I'm reading
You love it.
You Are the Placebo by Joe Dispenza right now. That's the book that I'm into. That's a deep one. That's a good one.
Okay. Oh my gosh. So I have to write that down because I love book recommendations. It's the best way to find your next best book. All right, Dennis, this has been like so extraordinary. So I just want to say thank you. I have 3 older brothers. So I've always been, and I'm in a male dominated industry, and I have always been surrounded by very gentlemanly gentlemen. And so I like very kind, rock climbing. And I was like one of the only girls at the time. Like everything of my life has always really been in a primarily male and dominated environment. And so I kind of do some coaching with some women where it's like, they have these concerns and I'm like, dude, most men are really freaking awesome. Like, can you just back off and cut him some slack? And as I raise a son to be a man, I'm grateful for influences like you. I'm grateful that, I know my husband, I'm like, you have to follow what they're doing over on Instagram, blah, blah, blah. Like this is way back when. And so I know that that's just an influence and it's just one more thing. And so I just want to say like double high five for all of your work and everything you're doing and going it all in on yourself. It's awesome.
Thank you so much. Truly appreciate it.
Yeah. So, okay, let's make sure everybody knows the best handles or wherever you want people to go. Like you get to dish away. What would you like to tell people?
All right. So to find me, the best spot is definitely Instagram. Very active. Post once a day. It's a combination of motivation. We promote guests. My brother and I fool around a lot. It's a lot of ball bus and shit that goes on there too. Instagram is building.men. My email address is buildingmencoach@gmail. Just got certified as an enlifted coach. So enlifted is around getting out of this victim mentality, victim mindset to become the hero of your journey. So I went through this whole process. A lot of the guests that I had on were so powerful, and I'm like, what was it? What's the magic sauce here? And it's about the language that we use when we're speaking to ourselves. So it's retraining our brain to not be soft in our conversations, to not say things like maybe and might and should and could. And it's being really strong in the way that we're communicating and then becoming this version of ourselves that's a really strong, powerful, confident version. So going through that, now I'm working with men particularly around rewriting that story that exists in our head, that we are no longer the victim of what's going on. So if you're interested in coaching, I do a free 30-minute call for anybody who's interested. I'll do the first 30-minute coaching call for free, and then I set up hour sessions with people. It's typically 12 weeks at a time, and I've seen some really unbelievable results working with people as a coach, especially if you're going through the bullshit. If you're going through that change of job, separation, divorce, because it can feel like you're alone. And having gone through it myself, it's been a really remarkable journey. And the big thing that's coming up, I mentioned that rite of passage thing. So I'm working with Austin, Linney, Chase Tollison, and my brother, and we are doing it's a 4-day, 3-night event in Lake Tahoe, April 28th through May 1st. It's called The Hero's Journey, and it is it'll be an unbelievable experience. It'll combine work on our identity as men. There'll be a physical fitness aspect to it because there's this high ropes adventure course there. My brother and Chase will be doing breath work, and they'll be doing meditation. We'll be doing badass like workouts, and then we actually have a comedian that's coming, Paul Roseberry, who was on my podcast. So the third night that we're there'll be a comedian, a show. We're doing a live podcast from the event. We'll be interviewing the guests that are there. It is the thing that I'm the most excited about in the world right now. This will be the first, and we're going to be doing one every season. So this will be our spring event. We'll be doing one in the summer, one in the fall, and one in the winter. So it's called The Hero's Journey. You could reach out to us for more information about that as well.
And I don't even know how that passed my mind, but I mean, Austin is a mutual friend of ours, and
Today's his birthday.
I thought, Yes,
Today
it is. I was thinking that I thought it was yesterday. So I'm like, yes, thank you. All right. Happy birthday, Austin.
Yep.
This will come out later, but you can feel loved and thought
Yep.
of. Just salt of the earth, amazing human being. And so if you haven't listened to Austin's podcast episode, make sure you go back and listen to that as well. But I already know that is going to be a rock star event. And so if you're a man, you need to like look into this. And Dennis, I'm just going to say this while I'm thinking about it. Please send me all the details, just so I can put them in the show notes. And then, so men, you get out there, you sign up, you go. You are going to have an exceptional time. It will be a breakthrough, and it's not going to be all like frou frou, rah rah rah, like all that stuff you're probably scared of. These are like men, and and ladies who are listening, send this information along to your man. Any man in your life, it's going to be exceptional.
It's funny you mentioned too, Julie. Of the listeners to the podcast, I want to say about 40% of the listeners to the Building Men podcast are females, and a lot of them. And I just reach out like, why? And like, we want to know like what's going on in our husband, our significant other's heads. And most of the feedback that I get on a regular basis, it's a woman reaching out saying, I listened to this episode. What great advice on working with my husband, or I told him to listen to this specific episode. So it's really interesting that you mentioned that as well. And I was surprised by it. I was like, wait a second, why are there's so many women listen to it? But I totally understand. I totally get why.
Yeah. And that just says, you know what, just going back to, I think that there are like more exceptional men in the world than they're given credit. And I think that the same is true of women. It's like, can we all just see each other for the beauty and the amazingness that we are and cheer each other on? So absolutely. I love that.
And
oh my gosh,
that men and women are different, and that's a great thing. We don't want to be the same. Like you want to have that polarity between masculine and feminine energy. That's what makes it work. That's why things can be great in the world, is when you have that polarity.
It's totally true. All right, Dennis, we're shutting this down, but from all my awesome listeners, you were just given an incredible gift. Rate it, review it, share it. This is one where it's like, just go share with the world, because this is an important message to get out. Until next time, live big and love bigger. What's the big deal about investing in apartments? Why is it better than investing in a slew of single-family homes? I've compiled a lot of information on why investing in a multifamily, also known as apartments, will help you reach your investment goals. Head over to 3keysinvestments.com and download the Why Invest in Multifamily guide today.